Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. I'd like to welcome you to the MuseScore Café. So, for those of you who are new here, welcome. For those of you who are returning, welcome back. And this is my regular weekly series where I talk about some aspect of making music using MuseScore. And every week we pick kind of a different topic, a different theme to be talking about, and I'll tell you about today's topic a bit later, but first, just the word from our sponsor, which is me, the Mastering MuseScore School, which I have pinned the link to the top of the chat. Please, oh, wait a minute. I see what you're saying. There we go. This thing has a privacy screen on the camera, and I was half obscured, I think. Okay, anyhow, Mastering MuseScore School, where I have my online courses, including the complete online course for learning MuseScore, as well as basic music theory, harmony and chord progressions, counterpoint, and more. So please be checking it out and check out all the courses that I have and all the different ways there are to learn about creating music. So, with that said, today's topic, I just want to go on a little tour of MuseScore and basically open every single window in the house. That's my plan. And I mentioned in a newsletter I have an ulterior motive for this. We are putting together the documentation for MuseScore 4, and I'm trying to make sure that we've really covered everything. Because, in MuseScore 3, features get added here and there. Maybe we remember to add something to the online handbook. Maybe I remember to add something to my online course about it, and maybe not. And maybe, there's features that are sitting here that are not necessarily all that well known, including by me. There's certain windows that I hardly ever use. So I'm going to tell you my game plan here, and then we'll see how well I can stick to it. The game plan is I'm going to run through the menus, open every single window, every single dialog in a menu. And I'm also going to click any button that I know will open a window. And I will also right-click things that I know have the ability to open windows, because that's something that a lot of people, especially Mac users, where right-click isn't a common gesture. Often you're not aware that there's a lot of things in right-click menus, but in case you don't know this, if you don't have a two-button mouse or you don't have an actual physical right-click, it's usually Control plus click, or on a touchpad, two-finger tap. So for instance, right off the bat, since I brought it up, I'm going to right-click this measure, and you see this dialog that just popped up, or this pop-up menu came up, and anything that has ... after it, like piano roll editor, ... staff part properties, and measure properties, ... That's telling me there's a window to open. So we're going to do that. We're going to right-click things that I know have ... things in their menus, and we're going to go through the menu and open things and just see what's there. So this is kind of a tour as opposed to me explaining how to use everything, but take notes as you go along. If there's some particular window that a lot of people are interested in, then if we have time at the end, I'll explore, a few selected things in more detail, or make that the topic of next week's cafe or some other future cafe. So let's just kind of do this. So I'm going to try to be organized about this, so I don't get too distracted by shiny objects that appear everywhere. So I'm going to start with the file menu, and the very first thing I see in it is Start Center. Well, this window you're probably somewhat familiar with, right? This window usually appears when you first start MuseScore, and then maybe you're in the habit of just closing it right away, or maybe you're in the habit of finding some scores and saying, "Oh, I got this score that I'm working on. I see in the list here." So there's a couple of things that I do want to point out about, even though I'm not going to teach you everything about every one of these windows. It wouldn't be nearly enough time. I want to point out the non-obvious things that are worth pointing out. So one of them is, if I scroll through this list of scores on the left, I'm going to see some of them that have funny names. SCTI 1609, SCKN 1609, SCY, whatever this is. I can't read, it's too small. But these scores that have these funny names, these are indications that MuseScore crashed while I was working on those scores. Either MuseScore crashed, or what actually happened yesterday, my whole computer crashed yesterday morning, and so all the scores that I had open are they're auto-saved by MuseScore. So if you open one of these scores here, like I'm going to try this one here. Okay, this is a score that I had been working on recently. And just know that because I now see it's SCY blah, 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 this isn't the real copy of my score. This is an auto-saved score. So if you continue working on this score, we don't know where this score even is. We don't know where it lives. So anytime you see one of these funny file names, realize that's an autosave score that's been recovered, and you'd better go out of your way to make sure you save it in the proper place with the proper name. So that's one thing to know about that window we were just in, is that it will be showing you some autosave files. And when I talk about saving it with the proper name, I'll come to that in a moment. But another thing to know about the Start Center is people often get confused, and they think that this is some magic place within MuseScore where your scores are saved, and then they're wondering, well, where are my scores? I don't see it in the Start Center anymore, or I see it in the Start Center, but I don't want it anymore. How do I get rid of it? The thing to know about the Start Center is this is not a place. It's a list. So these scores are not in the Start Center. They are not in MuseScore. They are just ordinary files on your computer. This is just a list of open files. Or recently open files. It's the exact same list you would see if you went to File, Open Recent. And here is that exact same list. These are just ordinary files on your computer. So that's what I want to say about Start Center. Let's go on. The next thing in here has a ... It's new. This is what you should be using to create new scores. Now, I know a lot of people are used to seeing... Oh, let me do the thing where you can see my keys. Sorry, let me do that so you can see what I'm clicking here. Sora, you've got a question about Linux, and I don't actually know... I can guess that you downloaded an app image, and now you have to run that app image, which you run from the command line or follow the instructions in the handbook on how to install the app image, which you also have to do at least once from the command line. So if you've got questions about that, go ask on the support forum, and someone will be able to walk you through that process. But definitely read the handbook section on installing the app image. Okay, so this score here is what we normally see when we first open MuseScore, right? It's just an empty score. And a lot of people start with this score. And you've seen me do things with this score. But this is only meant for like playing around. It's not meant for real life use. If you're going to really create a score, don't start with this one. Create a new one. And that's File, New. And there's a shortcut, Control-N. So this series of windows here is called the New Score Wizard. And it's where you enter information about your score, title, etc. And then on the next screen is where you can either choose instruments or pick a template. I can choose the Grand Staff template, and you see a little picture of it there. Or under chamber music, there's string quartet, there's saxophone quartet. Under band and percussion, you'll see there's concert band, etc. So these templates are there for you, and they're set up with a lot of things kind of the way you would normally want them. If you're writing for a concert band, this is a good setup. And then you can customize it from there. But use the templates. A lot of people, I think, aren't aware of those templates, but they're there. But if you know that you're writing a really oddball arrangement and none of those templates are going to work for you, then you can pick where it says choose instruments. And when I do that, I'll get another window. And this is where you actually select the instruments you want in your score. You want a recorder, a baritone saxophone, hand clap, and banjo. There's not a template for that. I am Pretty sure, right? So, and these are just the common instruments. Sometimes people say, well, what about the such and such instrument? I don't see it there. Well, if you search for something that you don't see in this list, like in this list, I think I don't see mandolin as a plucked instrument. But if I search for it in that search bar, you'll see, yeah, we have mandolin and other instruments also. That's because they're not in that common list. This drop down here shows you just common instruments by default, but you can also say, hey, I want to see all instruments, or I want to see all orchestral instruments, or all electronic instruments, etc. So yeah, there you go. So I see questions about other topics here, and what I will say about these are questions on random topics are best asked on the support forum. The first week of the month is when I do an Ask Me Anything session, and that's when I'll go into all these other questions. But I do want to keep this focused on the topic. So, so for multi-measure rest, yeah, read the handbook section on multi-measure rest to understand how it works. And if you still have questions, go to the support forum, and you'll usually have an answer within minutes. If you post that question right now, it will be answered before this cafe is over, almost guaranteed. Okay, so this dialog here, anyhow, is where you will select instruments for your score. And then when we go on is when you'll select the starting key signature. And then going on is when you can select the starting time signature. It's also when you can select if you want a pickup measure. If you want it to be 1 beat of pickup like this, you make it 1/4. If you want 3/8 notes of a pickup, well, then you literally do that. Enter 3 in here and select 8 here. And then you'll have 3/8 notes worth of pickup. And then that's the last dialogue in this wizard. You press finish, and you have your score set up now with all of those instruments set up appropriately. So that's what that new score wizard is. I'm just going to keep going. And again, if you see particular windows that I open that you're like, wait a minute, go back to that one, I want to know more about the thing. If we have time at the end, that's when I'll address those. And as I said, maybe I'll make one of those a topic of next week. The next thing here is the open dialog. And I see a question about the red circle here. That is just an accessibility feature on my computer. I'm using a Chromebook, and it's like in my mouse settings. Windows has a similar setting. Mac OS has a similar setting. Somewhere in your mouse settings on your computer is where that comes from. So the open dialog looks different on every system because it's trying to emulate, to some extent, like to look comfortable. Like I'm on Linux, I'm on a Chromebook running Linux. It's a complicated thing, but that's what it is. I'm on a Chromebook, and that's where the red circle is coming from, but MuseScore is running as a Linux app. And this dialog is designed to look somewhat like Linux file dialogs look, except different versions of Linux have different file dialogs also. So it's way more complicated than that. In any case, the question often comes up, like when we looked at the Start Center, I said it's not a place. When you save a file, it's just a normal file stored in a normal folder on your computer. Well, this is where you could find out where that is. Like if I'm looking at a list of files here, if I'm wondering, well, gee, what folder am I in? Usually at the top is a control. Like right here, you can see this control has got this little ... So I'm not seeing the full name of the folder. If I expand the width of this dialog, I will eventually see the full name of that folder. It's Home, Marc Sabatella, Documents, MuseScore 3, Scores, Mastering MuseScore, Masterclass 2022. That's a folder I created, and it's the last folder I used. Every time you open a file in MuseScore, it will default to showing you the last folder that you used. And similarly, every time you save. So if you have any confusion at all about where your files are going, be paying attention to this when you open them, and when you save them, be paying attention to what folder they're in. And on the left is usually a list of like recently used folders. On my system, I can actually drag folders into this list. So it's like pins them for easy reuse. But again, every operating system is different in that respect. So that's the open dialog. It also lets you create a new folder if your operating system allows that. It lets you change from list view. Oh, there's we go. List view, where it's just a list of the files rather than all the details. Probably on some operating systems, it'll show icons or icons for the things. So that's the open dialog. The save dialog looks pretty similar. It's showing me the last folder I saved to, which is different than the last folder I opened from. And again, it's kind of truncating the name here, but if I expand the width of this dialog, I can see the full name of, it's a little wider, full name of the folder. And it's showing me all the files and the folders in there. So when I go, if you are in doubt about where you just saved a file to, well, open a new file or create a new file and save it. When you save it, it will default to the same folder that you just used. So that's one way of finding out what folder you just saved to. Save something else. It'll default to the same folder. So the save dialog is that. Another thing you might want to know about this dialog is by default, MuseScore saves in a format called MSCZ. Sometimes you'll see that listed as compressed MuseScore file. That's the normal file format. If you don't have a really specific reason to need another format, don't change it. However, there is another format, the uncompressed MuseScore file. It doesn't mean it's less quality, it just means it's bigger. And it's not just bigger. The compressed, the Z in MSCZ means it's a zip file. So technically it's not just one file. It's like it's an archive that contains your score as well as other things. Those other things will include things like images. If you pasted any images into your score, they get saved separately as part of that zip file. But if you save in MSCX format, your images don't get saved. So if you have any images in your file, MSCX won't work for you. There's special cases where it could possibly be useful to use that format, but it lets you edit it in a text editor if you feel like doing that. There's all sorts of special advanced techniques that MSCX could be useful for, but the vast majority of people, vast majority of the time, MSCZ is what you want. So that's the save dialog. The next dialog here, save as, okay, I opened up save a copy, but it's essentially the same thing, right? This dialog looks exactly the same. This is the save a copy dialog. The save as dialog.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Siri thinks I'm talking to her, but she's wrong. Lost my train of thought. Save as, did that sound like Siri? I don't know. But save as will take your existing score and save it under a new name. And then when you do that, that becomes your current score. In other words, if I have MuseScore Café open and I use file save as and then give it a new name, it's going to default to the existing name. But if I give it a new name and call it MuseScore Café New, now I have a new copy of it. And it changed. This is now the copy I'm working on. That save as. Save a copy makes a new copy, but it just saves it and leaves you working on your original copy. So they both make a copy. It's just a question of which one it leaves you working on. And so depending on whether you want to work on the new copy or work on the old copy, you can use either of those. Now, there's another command, save selection here, where if I select just a few measures and then say file, save selection, I get that same dialog box, but what this is doing is literally saving just those measures. It's going to create a new score containing only those measures. This command I don't recommend relying on because it is very seldom used, very not well tested, and there are known bugs in it and unknown bugs in it. There was all sorts of cases where, well, gee, if the time signature was anything other than 4/4, it would get confused. If there wasn't a time signature at the beginning of the selection, it would get confused. Now I think we fixed that, but there's still cases where it does bad things in In anything but the most common cases, it could potentially do bad things. So it's not going to mess up your existing score, but the thing that you save, this new score that it creates containing only that selection, yeah, it may or may not actually work well. So in any case, that command exists. The dialog, though, is the same save dialog as everything else. Now, by the way, Sora, about the app image thing, once you run it with the install option, it is then installed like anything else. Like if I go now to my taskbar at the bottom here, there's MuseScore's icon, and it's right there like any other program that's installed. So once you've installed your app image, it really is just like any other program. But you do have to do that install step if you don't want to have to always run it from the command line. All right. So save online. If I do that, this is how you can save to MuseScore.com. And apparently I haven't done it from my new computer yet. So it wants me to log in, and I'm not going to bother doing that right now. But this is one way to save from MuseScore. Save to MuseScore.com from within MuseScore. You can also go to MuseScore.com and say upload score or whatever the command is over there. So you can save online either from within MuseScore or from MuseScore.com. Let's see, import PDF. I don't know how many people have tried this one, but this is a kind of experimental service, and it says that right here, experimental service. It's actually on MuseScore.com. As you can see, when I did that, it actually sent me over to MuseScore.com in my web browser. And it will attempt to import a PDF file. It won't necessarily do a great job. It's going to try. It's an artificial intelligence algorithm. It's a program called Autosaved that is actually capable of producing good results, but Autosaved has its own user interface that lets you correct errors and do things within it. And this import facility just uses the default settings in Autosaved, and so it doesn't give you nearly the full level of control that the full Autosaved program does. So if you try using this to import a PDF, you will probably be very disappointed with the results. If you actually download Autosaved and start playing with its settings, or try using a third-party program to try to convert PDF into something actually usable, like Music XML, maybe you'll only be a little disappointed, or quite disappointed, but you'll probably be very disappointed with the results of this import PDF. But it is there, and in some cases at least, it does work. So anyhow, take your chances. It doesn't hurt to try. It does hurt to try too hard. If at first you don't succeed, don't try again on this one. Just say, you know what, rather than continuing to try other things and downloading free trials of other programs and hoping to import your PDF, it will be faster just to type the thing in yourself. It really will be in the long run. Okay, next we have the export dialog. The export dialog changed relatively recently, like at 3.5 or 3.6. So it used to just immediately take you to that file, same file dialog, but then let you, the save dialog, but then let you pick more formats. But now there's a separate stage here where you can select the format, whether you want to save as PDF or MP3 or MIDI or Music XML, etc. You can also choose whether you want to export just the full score or if you want to export the parts also. You can also choose whether you want, if you do select, like right here, I'm going to select the score and all the parts. Or maybe I'll unselect the score, so it's just the parts. Then you can choose whether you want them each exported as a separate file or whether you want them all combined into one file. That works for PDF. I don't know if that makes any sense for MP3. And so that option goes away for MP3. For MP3, there's separate settings there. So anyhow, that's the export dialog. It's how you can convert from MuseScore to some other format. And then the export button here has ... after it, and that brings up the familiar save dialog that lets you actually pick the file name. So there you go. So yeah, and by the way, yeah, double clicking an app image does work, but again, much better if you actually install it. It takes 5 seconds to install it. You type the name of the app image followed by the word install, and then you get the actual icon on your taskbar or whatever your Linux desktop environment provides. And it also gives you things like file associations. Like if I click a score here and well, it didn't work here. Sometimes I think it's because I haven't. Anyhow, sometimes it doesn't work, but it does actually set up the file associations. It does everything that a normal install would. So I highly recommend using the install option on your app image rather than running it from the icon or from the command lines. Much better experience. All right. File, we've gone as far as export. Let's go to Score Properties. Score Properties has this is not information that shows up in your score anywhere necessarily except the copyright message. The copyright message that's here will be the same copyright message you see at the bottom of your score. That's set up by default. The rest of the information here is what's called metadata. It's just information that's saved along with your score for your own benefit later. And it is possible then to do some special things in the style dialog that will allow you to see the creation date in the footer or in the header. It's possible to get this information to show up in your score in certain ways, but mostly this is just information for your own benefit. It also does this nice thing of telling you where this score lives. Like this is telling me that this score lives in this folder here. That's a relatively new thing also that was also designed to help people get over confusion about where their files are. In fact, I want to find out where this sc blah 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 file is. I have a feeling I know where it lives. I think it lives in some really weird random folder that's part of the MuseScore installation. But I'm going to find out. I'm going to go to File, Score Properties. Local share MuseScore 3. Yeah, so local share. This is part of MuseScore. This is where my app image is installed in local share. And so that's telling me that, yeah, this is this autosave file. It's not in my documents folder. It's not along with my other scores. It's in this special place where autosave files get stored. So score properties can be a nice, quick way of finding out where that score actually lives, and then say, oh, I don't want it there, and then you can use save as to put it where you want. So file parts is next. This is where if right now I have a score here for a cantus and an altus. And if I want to have them as separate parts, I can click the all parts button here and then OK. And now I have separate parts for the cantus and the altus. The cantus firmus. It's not even a cantus firmus. It's just it's a cantus firmus in Renaissance speak, and it's the alto part. It's two different melodies, a soprano and an alto, is what it really is. Normally in choral music you don't actually do that so much, but you do in instrumental music. So you may have noticed MuseScore Café had all those tabs for all the different instrumental parts. Vocalists typically read from the full score so they can understand how their part fits in with the other parts. Instrumentalists typically read from individual parts. So the guitar player is not seeing the trombone part. So file parts is how you do that. File parts is you hit all parts and it'll just generate all the parts for you. And you can also customize things from there, generate additional parts, do things where you have like two trumpets on the same staff with different voices, but get them into different parts, all sorts of fancy things you can do in the parts dialog. So what's going on? File print. Well, that's pretty straightforward. And again, this dialog is different on every operating system. So I don't even want to go into any detail here because no one else is going to see what I see here. This is, what shows up on my own particular flavor of Linux running within Chromebook. But yeah, this is where you would here I have an options dialog where I can pick which pages I want to print, etc. You probably have something similar, but it probably looks very different. So that's the print dialog. And then we have quit, which is not a dialog. It will quit the program, so I'm not going to do that one. All right, I made it through the file dialog in only a half an hour. Obviously, I'm not going to finish this, but we'll see. I'm going to just keep running. Not all. See, the file dialog, I mean, the file menu, almost everything in here has that dot, dot, dot. There were lots of little lots of little dialogues there. But the edit menu doesn't have nearly as many. It's only got two. So edit instruments. This shows you the list of instruments in your score, and it looks just like that instrument dialog we saw in the new score wizard. So when you're creating a new score, you get to select the instruments, but in edit instruments, you get to add new instruments. You can say, hey, I want a recorder in this piece, and double click it, and there it is. You can remove it from the score. You can use these arrows to rearrange it. You can also have MuseScore automatically manage the ordering of things. Right now, these are in jazz combo order, which has piano above bass and drums. If I change it to orchestral order, you'll see that now the drums are above the piano because, yeah, in orchestral music, percussion goes above piano, and that's pretty normal. So there you go. So you can rearrange your instruments or add new ones or remove them in that dialog. Moving on, edit preferences. This is a whole ton of settings. These are not settings of your score. These are settings for the program. So these are settings that when you make them, they stay made. And when you close MuseScore and reopen it, they will still be there. And they include things like, here's the font size that's used for the icons and the text in the program. This is telling me that when I first start MuseScore, it's using that empty score there. That's its name, my first score, if you didn't know. There's other settings here for things like what color the background is, like this area here, this kind of dark blue area between the pages and around the pages. You can set that color and lots of other things. There's some options to control what happens during node input, options to control behavior of scores. I have a custom style file set here. So every time I create a new score, it applies this style to it. Normally, I recommend using templates for that. If you say, oh, I always create lead sheets, or I always create string quartets, so let me just make that be my default style. No, use templates for that. But in my case, it's my system doesn't recognize my page size correctly. If I didn't have this style set up here, all my new scores would be A4 format instead of letter format. And that's it's an issue with how Linux communicates with the Qt system that MuseScore relies on, and it's out of our control. So in any case, I have fixed it by creating a style file that says, make sure it's letter size, and that's the only style setting it has in it. So that's like a customization that I did. If anyone else has that problem, we'll talk about that some other time about how that works. But yeah, lots of settings in here. Here are I/O settings where it's letting me pick which audio device gets used. Import settings where it chooses when it's what style to use for imported scores, whether it should import the layout settings from music XML files. Here's a bunch of settings for export. And one of my favorite parts of this is the shortcuts customization. So DA, if you're saying that it's defaulting for A4 for you, but you would rather it be letter, it should be the case that it inherits whatever your default printer is. So whatever your default printer is, the default page size for that default printer will be MuseScore's default. It's just that doesn't work on Linux. On Apple, it should work. So make sure your default printer is set and that your default page size is set within that printer to what you want, and it should work. But if not, you can use my letter score and my letter score style file. Ask me about that. Go over to the community and ask me about that. And actually, I'll post that to the community because I think it's a useful resource that I should make more widely available. So in any case, this customization of shortcuts is something that I really like. So DA, if you're saying not so, you're saying not so for you. For most Mac users, it works. It's only on Linux where it's known to basically not work for anyone. For Mac, though, it normally does work. Definitely try that first, the printer thing. So the shortcuts, customizing shortcuts, highly useful. So it's a wonderful capability that I use to some extent. I try to just learn the default so I don't have to relearn it every time I install on a new machine or get a new version of MuseScore. But not every update will obliterate these, but moving from MuseScore 2 to MuseScore 3 does. Moving from MuseScore 3 to MuseScore 4 will, because there will be too many changes. And then there's miscellaneous other settings in here to control colors of, like, what color does voice 1 highlight? There's that blue, green for voice 2, orange for voice 3, purple for voice 4. This is where you can customize those colors. So anyhow, that was edit, preferences, and that's all the things here. So there you go. So that's the edit menu. View menu. Master palette. So this window here is kind of an anachronism. It really mostly doesn't need to be here anymore. It used to serve a function in customizing palettes. It no longer really serves that function. But when I say it used to serve a function, let me show you what that is. If I open my clefs palette here, there's only a couple clefs there. That's because I'm in the basic workspace. Well, if I change to the advanced workspace and reopen that clefs palette, now I've got some more clefs, but it's not all of them. If I click the More button here, I see these other clefs that are so rare, we didn't even include them in the advanced workspace. So this is how you can access those other clefs without needing that master palette. And then if you want them here, you can just drag them there. If you're like, oh yeah, I use this one a lot, then just drag it in, and now it's there. Yes, you can access all the clefs that are present without needing that master palette. But it didn't used to be that way. It used to be the only way to get some of those extra funny clefs was to go to the master palette here. So that's no longer the case. So this no longer serves that function. But it does serve a couple of functions that I have a feeling we will eventually separate out, so the rest of this can go away. Key signatures, this is where you can define your own key signatures. If you're writing Turkish music that uses its own folkloric key signatures, or some other, non-Western music where you need custom key signatures with microtonal accidentals, this is where you can define that. Similarly for time signatures, if you need 11/8 or 13/8 or 13/16 or 2.5 over 8/4 or whatever, this is where you could define all of that kind of stuff. So these two dialogues or parts of the dialogue are still quite useful, but you don't need that whole dialogue to get there. You can also get there with a shortcut. Shift K will take you right to key signatures, and Shift T will take you right to time signatures. So I'm going to guess that in a future version of MuseScore, the rest of that dialogue will just go away, and there will just be a way to get directly to key signatures, directly to time signatures. And in fact, there already is. If I go to key signatures, more, you'll see there's a button there, Create Key Signature. So there's, whoa, oh, that's interesting. When I do it that way, it doesn't show me the thing on the top. And I wonder if that's, yeah, okay, I have to make my window bigger. That's probably just an artifact of how my display is set up. So probably most of you aren't seeing it that way. But here's just the key signature section as a separate window. So really, we didn't need that full master palette for that. The other thing that's on the master palette, though, is the symbols section. And if you don't know about this section is awesome. Look at all these symbols. There are tons of symbols that are part of MuseScore that are not on any of the palettes. And that's because these symbols are meaningless to MuseScore. We don't know what they are. They're just characters in the music symbols font that comes with MuseScore. So MuseScore has no concept of what these symbols are for, what they mean, how to position them, what they should do for playback, but they're useful symbols. And so this is the full list, and it's a very overwhelming list, but there is a search facility here. So if you know you're looking for a particular symbol like the brass flip, type flip in here, and you get these different flip symbols. There's one, brass flip, another one for constant circular motion flipped. There you go. But here's a brass flip. You can also look underneath symbols here and you'll see kind of divided up into categories. So if you're looking for German Renaissance lute tablature, here are symbols associated with that. Right? If you're looking for symbols associated with Kodai hand signs, there's that. If you're looking for symbols that are very specific to harp, here's harp technique symbols, etc. So you can add these symbols then to your score, just the same way you'd add anything else. Click something in your score, click the symbol, and there it is. It's up to you again to position it right, and it doesn't mean anything for playback, but you can have the symbol. So that part of the dialogue is incredibly useful, and that is also so useful that there's a shortcut for it, and it's just Z. If I press Z, then the symbols dialog appears. So that part of that dialog is quite useful. So that's the end of the master palette. What else is in the view menu? Okay, so the view menu has a number of windows that don't have ... after them, but nevertheless open windows. And the distinction is ... is for a dialog that's designed to like open and then close, but some of these are windows that are designed to stay open, like the palettes, right? Palettes stays open. Inspector stays open. The play panel here stays open. So all of those we kind of see already. There's also Navigator, and you can open that, and it will stay open. Navigator, let me make it bigger. I just opened it. Is this thing you can use if you, like right now, when I navigate my score, I usually use the scroll wheel, which is 2-finger swipe. And then if I want to scroll horizontally, I can use 2-finger swipe horizontally, or I can use Shift plus 2-finger swipe. So I was doing this, or I can hold Shift while doing that to scroll horizontally. But if you rather would drag something around the screen, you can do that with the Navigator. It's another way of moving around. So that's the Navigator. And then there's the timeline. Let me close that so it doesn't take up too much room. I'm going to open the timeline. The timeline is another interesting thing, especially for larger scores, where it will let you see like things like, hey, I can see that there's a double bar here. I can see there's a repeat there, or at least I could see it if it were bigger. And I can also see measure numbers here. And then when I click on that measure number, it takes me directly there. If there had been a tempo change in here, it would show me that. If there had been any rehearsal marks, it would show me that. So then, or you could just look at the score itself. Like, let me drag this here so I can see a little more. You can look at this display area here and see, this is where the guitar comes in after some measures of being different. So here is that, but over here, what am I looking at? Well, it takes a little getting used to, and I'm not used to it, is my excuse. This is showing me, this highlighted area is showing me what you can see on screen. But you can eyeball this to see, oh, look, this is where the trumpets come in. The trumpets have rests here, but then the trumpets come back in there. And then I can click to that spot. Oh, it's the other way around, sorry. This is where the trumpets are playing. This is where the trumpets rest. So you can easily jump to particular areas of your score based on the based on who's coming in, who's coming out. And yeah, that symbol section is great for early music. It's great for any sort of experimental, 20th century, 21st century music where you're using any sort of non-traditional notation. So yeah, there's a lot of things in that symbols palette that are part of a music font. There's a standard called Smoofle for music fonts. And so the fonts that come with MuseScore implement this Smoofle standard. And so that means they come with this set of thousands of symbols that are really useful. All right, so that's the timeline. And that came up in discussion recently in the community. Also, there was a discussion about it on, I think, either on Facebook or in the support forum. All right, what else we have? Well, we have the mixer. And you've probably seen the mixer before, right? It's this window where you can control things like the relative volume of all the instruments. You can control which sound is used. Normally, you would, if I want to change from trumpet to, trombone, I'm not going to just change the sound. I want to actually change instrument, and I'll show you that later if I can hurry up here. But normally you wouldn't just change the sound, you change the instrument. But if for guitar, you do change sound. So like guitar, it's set to funk guitar sound. But if I can change it here to one of the other, to overdrive guitar or palm muted guitar or clean guitar, Hawaiian guitar, these are other sounds available. So this is where I can change those things. And also I can solo track so I only hear that one, or mute it so I don't hear that one. And I can change the volume of the track. You can see I've already pulled down the trombone volume because it was too loud by default. And there's some settings for MIDI output also if you're using a MIDI output device, which I'm not, so none of these settings will apply. So anyhow, those are the things you do in the mixer. And also here we have the synthesizer window. This is where the usually by default you would come up on the fluid tab, and this is where you would install other sound fonts. This is the default sound font. If I click add here, it will show me other sound fonts that are on my system. But since this is a new computer, I don't think there's any. Oh, look at that. That's right. I set it all up so I have all the same sound fonts available. So if I want to use, these are all sound fonts that I downloaded at some point. And because I'm on a Chromebook, I have it all set up where it's shared between my other Chromebook, the folder, and it's kind of a nice setup that I like a lot. So these are files that I downloaded in some cases years ago, but they're all here even on my new computer. And this is where I would install some of my, sound fonts that I've previously downloaded. But also, this is where you can control things like the amount of reverb that's applied. You can also control the master tuning. Like if you're working with early music and you want to tune to, 432 or 424 or 441 or whatever other thing, early music, experimental music, or just an out-of-tune piano or whatever you want to tune to, this is where you can change the global tuning for MuseScore. The Dynamics tab here is where if you start messing with alternate sound fonts, things like, single note dynamics, the ability to go to change volume within a single note, this is something that MIDI itself doesn't support well. There are ways of doing it, but it was sort of not, they didn't think of it when they first thought of MIDI. And so everyone who implements it a little differently. And so this is the tab where if you use a non-default sound font, where you can try to override the settings that MuseScore uses so that those single note dynamics will work with your third-party sound font. And as always, if you have problems figuring out which settings go with which sound font, the support forum is a great place to ask, because then there's a pretty good chance that someone else uses that same sound font and has already figured this out and can tell you, oh yeah, for this sound font, use blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah settings. So that's what's in the synthesizer window. View selection filter. This is kind of a neat thing here. When I do this, it shows down here in the corner, and this is what will allow you to select only certain things. Like if I click this measure here, and I want to delete just the notes, but leave the chord symbol, I'm going to uncheck chord symbols from the selection filter. And what you'll see is the chord symbol there is no longer selected. To make that more obvious, let me reselect it. See how the chord symbol is blue, just like the notes are? If I unselect chord symbols, that means the chord symbol is no longer selected. So if I hit delete now, the notes went away, but the chord symbol stayed behind because it's not selected. Use of the selection filter is kind of, it works a little backwards from how you might think. You're not clicking what gets deleted. You're not selecting what gets selected. You're unselecting what doesn't get selected. So it's a little tricky to wrap your brain around. And maybe at some point I'll do a whole session just on use of the selections. But I actually have done whole sessions on selections and have spent some time on the selection filter. But anyhow, that's what that's for. You can also make it so if there's multiple voices, it only selects voice 1 and leaves voice 2 unselected. And that'll allow you to unselect one voice while leaving another voice selected. So you can delete one voice, leave the other, or transpose one voice but not the other, whatever you want to do that way. Okay, keep going. So the score. Oh, wait a minute. Selection filter. The piano keyboard's a nice little tool that maybe some of you haven't seen, and apparently I made it bigger at some point. Let me shrink this down to a more normal size. The piano keyboard is there to let you, and there's a shortcut for it, P, to open it and close it. The piano keyboard, if I go into note input mode, I can now actually just click the things in this keyboard, and it enters the notes. Right? So the piano keyboard is kind of nice for that. It also, as you select notes, you can see that it's highlighting what you've selected. I apparently have 3 notes selected. Oh, it's showing me that that chord has 3 notes, but only one of them is actually clicked. That's the one that's blue. So the piano keyboard will show you stuff about the music you've already entered, but it was actually originally designed as just a visual way of entering notes into a score. If you don't have a MIDI keyboard, but you want to be able to enter a note just by clicking the piano key, there you go. The piano keyboard does it. So that was the piano keyboard. I'll close that one. I'm going to close that selection filter. Let me come back here and say score comparison tool. So this is a tool that basically compares 2 scores. So for instance, MuseScore Café new current version to MuseScore Café last saved version. If I press compare now, it'll show me what I've done. I've inserted a dynamic. I added some dots to a chord, or I removed them, one or the other. I changed the pitch from C to D. These are the things you just saw me do. It's showing me the changes that I just made. So, yeah, it's a definitely a useful tool to compare a score versus against how that score started off in this session, or maybe a different saved version of it. Or when I teach, I'll have like, here's the answer I expect, and then I'll load a student's score and compare my master version to their version to see what things they did differently, to see basically if they got wrong answers or if their answers are both good. So score comparison tool is useful for that. Oh, and when you do that, notice it's showing you the 2 scores. As soon as I did the comparison, it split my screen so that I could see the one version on one side, the other version on the other side. To undo that, I'm going to have to uncheck where it says document side by side. But you can use that side-by-side view without using the comparison view. You've probably seen me do that during the score of the month session, where I'll have a PDF, an image of a score that I'm trying to copy on one side and my score itself on the other. So that's using that same side-by-side view. In fact, the comparison tool is why the side-by-side view was developed. Okay, toolbars. This just lets you select which toolbars are available, so you can like say, hey, I don't really want to see the, if I don't want to see the node input toolbar, then now it's gone, right? So that's what that does. But there's also a customized toolbars dialog that's kind of neat. In here, you can actually control which buttons are there. Like if you're doing early music and you really want that longa on your toolbar, you can get it there this way. Oh, it already is on the toolbar. If you don't want it there because you're not doing early music, you can remove it. So, you just click this and then send it over there to the available action side, and now it's no longer there. So if I press OK now and I bring that toolbar back, which I can also do by right-clicking and say, hey, give me my node input toolbar back, the longa is now gone, which is fine. I never use it. Even doing early music, I never use that thing. So that's where you can customize the contents of toolbars. The Workspaces menu has a bunch of things in it. Mostly don't open menus, but there is this one here to create a new workspace. And if I create a new workspace, you'll see you can select a name for it, but you can also select what's in that workspace. And I've done a session on customization where I go into detail on this, but basically this workspace control in the top right is where I change between different workspaces I've created. There's the basic and advanced that come with MuseScore, but I've created my own specialized workspaces. And this is where you control which things are saved as part of that workspace, and which things just use whatever your global settings are. So for instance, if I change to my presentation workspace, you'll see, this is nice and clean, right? It got rid of all the toolbars and everything else. And that's because I told it to make toolbars part of this workspace. So my toolbar settings are part of this workspace, whereas the other toolbar settings are shared between all workspaces. But this workspace has its own set of toolbar settings, so that the customizations I make in this workspace only affect this workspace. So that's what that dialog was for. Tools, Workspace, New is where you can create, choose the settings that are going for this new workspace. It's also, there should be a ... on that edit, but there's not. If I pick edit, it's going to basically pop up that same dialog again to let me customize, to let me change my mind and say, oh no, I don't want to have my own toolbar settings. I just want to use the global settings here. So the toolbar, there you go. That was the workspace customization. There's nothing else in here that opens up a dialog. Let's see if I can get through the add menu at least, because there's not a whole lot of dialogs here. Notes, node input. Yeah, there's no dialogs here. Intervals, nothing in there. Tuplets. There is a dialog here. So tuplets, like things like triplets, you probably know Control 3 will do a triplet. Control 4 will be a quadruplet, etc. What if you need a 13 tuplet? You can't type Control 13 because that's not a thing. You can't. You don't have a 13 key on your keyboard, but you can go to tuplets, other. And this brings up a dialog where you can tell it, hey, I want 13 notes in the space of 8, and it will gladly create a 13 tuplet, which apparently it did, and freaked out entirely because I don't even know what I had. I have no idea what I had selected at the time. So I don't know what it just did, and I don't care. So that was the add tuplets other. What else we got here? Measures. So if I say add measures, you can see that there's insert one measure, which has a shortcut insert, append one measure, Control B, but there's also insert measures. And if I do that, it brings up a dialog that says, how many do you want to insert? So if you know you want to insert 8 measures, this is the dialog you want to insert 8 measures or 123 measures or however many measures you want to insert or append. So frames, there's no windows to open here, so I'll move on. Text, I don't think there's any windows to open here. No, these are all just things that add things directly, and there's no windows to open here in the lines menu either. So I won't do this either. So yeah, this is cool. It's like, just by looking at all these menus, some of them I haven't, or windows, there's lots of ones I haven't seen in a long time myself. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that that's a thing. So yeah, I'm going to keep going for a little bit, but yeah, I'm obviously not going to get to every window because I'm probably halfway through the menus, and then there's, a dozen others beyond that, but I'm just going to move on a little bit here. Under format, style is a really important window. This is where you set settings that affect this score, right? Preferences were settings that affect MuseScore in general and apply to all scores and persist when you restart MuseScore. These are settings that apply to just one score. This is why this score here has the jazz font, because it's set to MuseJazz. If I change it to Leland, now it's Leland font. These are settings for all sorts of things like how tightly spaced my measures are. If I crank this up, my measures get wider, or, etc. If I go to the, I'm not even sure what else I'm going to be able to see in here that you'll be able to tell right away, but, it's here are tuplets, style settings that controls whether the number shows up, whether a bracket shows up. It controls all the default settings for things in this score. So style dialog, hugely, hugely powerful dialog. I have that open a whole lot. Page settings is one that goes kind of with it, and yeah, it's kind of related in a lot of ways, but it's separate dialogues for historical reasons. These are style settings also in a way, but they have to do with the physical layout of your scores exclusively. How big your paper is, how big the margins are, and how big the staff is. So these are the settings for that. Here's page size is a drop down where you can, pick a page size or enter a custom width and height. This is where you choose whether you want it portrait or landscape format. You choose the margins. You choose this guy here, staff space, scaling staff space. This is the most important setting to know about making things bigger or smaller, because everything scales with it. As I scale down here, this dialog isn't live, so I have to hit apply. But when you hit apply, you see everything got smaller. Everything scales with the staff space. This is literally setting the distance between two staff lines. It's setting the size of your staff space, but that is the unit of measurement that MuseScore and pretty much all notation programs use to control spacing. In other words, the sizes of things, like there's settings in MuseScore to control how thick a slur is. Well, what unit does it use? Is it how thick it is in millimeters? No. The style setting for how thick a slur is in staff space units. It's 0.1 staff spaces is how thick slurs are, or whatever the setting is. Everything is measured in terms of staff spaces, so that as you make the staff size bigger, everything scales with it. So this is your key to sizing things in MuseScore. All right, what else can I do? In the format menu here, we have add, remove system breaks. This is really nice in parts. I might have used it. Let me go to the trumpet part here. So my trumpet part here, it looks like I added my breaks manually here, but we all know, well, I don't know if you all know it, but if in a jazz setting, it's really common for parts to be, especially lead sheets, to be 4 measures per line. So having your line breaks every 4 measures could be a useful thing. So if I go to Format, Add, Remove System Breaks, you'll see it lets me break the systems every 4 measures or every 6 measures or whatever I decide I want. So this dialog would do that. If I do that, now I have breaks every 4 bars. In this particular case, it was a little bit of an odd choice because the pickup I really wanted 5 bars on the first system. So I should have selected everything but the pickup and then said 4 bars after that. But no matter. I'm just showing you where that command is. So yeah, that command. I think I'll make it through the format menu and then stop. So the last 2 things in the format menu are load style and save style. So save this. Remember when I showed you my letter style file that I used to force MuseScore to use letter size paper? This load and save style, if you've done a lot of customizations to your style settings and then you're like, you know what, I want some other score that uses, first of all, if you make a bunch of customizations to a score and then you want to create another score just like it, save it as a template. Then you can reuse that score and it'll use not only the style settings, but the same instruments also. And that's often what you want. But what if you just want those style settings, but to apply to totally different instrumentation? Then instead of a template, you're going to want to use a style file. So you will use that dialog to say Format, Save Style, to save your style file. And you can see I've saved a whole bunch of style files here. That will save a style file. And then you go to your other score that you want to use the same style in and say Format, Load Style, and then select that same style file. So there you have it. Yeah, I'm going to stop here because there's still enough to talk about to be worth me devoting another session to this. So I think I'm going to do that. I think next week, we got 5 weeks this month. Next week, I'm going to continue my tour. So that's my plan. I will continue my tour next week. And if you've all got questions, any things in particular that you thought were particularly interesting this week that you want me to review or go into more detail on, let me know in the comments here or in the community, so I make sure that I see them and make sure that I continue to see them, because I might, if you put it in the chat here, I'm not going to see it after a few minutes from now. Yeah, I'm going to continue the tour and maybe go into more detail on anything that people thought was interesting or particularly useful. So that's what I got for you. Let me go back, since I've made a whole bunch of changes to that MuseScore Café theme. Let me go back to my original version. And I'm going to do that by reopening the Start Center. Come on, Start Center. On this computer, it seems sometimes I have to press function keys twice before they work. It's just the way it is. And now I gotta turn down my volume a little bit to talk over it. So thanks everyone for being here. And yeah, I just thought it was going to be interesting just to run through all these windows and see what's all there and to remind myself and help you guys see some stuff that maybe you didn't know was there. And we'll continue the tour next week. There's a few more windows to show you, and then I'll go into more detail on the ones that warrant it. And so again, this session brought to you by the Mastering MuseScore School. The link is pinned at the top of the chat. That's where everything I just showed you, I guarantee you, is covered in the course in enough detail that you can then say it'll be a whole 10-minute video just on that one dialog, basically, so that you can learn really how to use it and see all the controls demonstrated and so forth. So it's when it says complete online course, I'm not kidding. It really shows you everything about everything. So if you haven't already signed up for it, boy, I just can't recommend it highly enough. But also all the theory courses and so forth that I have are really excellent. I put a lot of work into them, and I definitely recommend checking them out. So hope you've had a good time here today, and next week we'll just continue the tour. So see you all next time.